So hi everyone, my name is Leah and I go by Chandra in Second Life. I am a full-time speakeasy. I am a full-time department administrator at the University of New Mexico. I earned my master's in organizational learning and instructional technology and a doctorate in organization, information, and learning sciences, both at the University of New Mexico. Throughout my course of studies, I have found social presence to be a fascinating concept. I read about social presence in my very first doctoral class in 2012. There were 3 assigned readings in this class talking about social presence, and their titles were enough to make me curious. Examining social presence in online courses in relation to students' perceived learning and satisfaction. The next one was examining instructor and student perspectives of online interaction through the community of inquiry model. And the relationship of social presence and interaction in online classes. So several flags popped up for me. There was the pervasive use of the word online with class, followed by student, social presence, and interactions. This led me down the rabbit hole that ended with a dissertation using a social presence model to qualitatively explore text-based communication and images of avatar placement during discussions in Second Life. So my second model involved measuring knowledge construction, but that's a talk for a different day. So I was hooked. Online classes were growing in popularity, and I was curious, how did people connect and learn using a technology-based medium? Were lectures, notes, readings, written assignments, individual and group projects, tests really translating to allow students to receive quality education and interactions during their online learning? I think that we all have opinions about that. However, social presence kept coming up in the literature, and it was important to take apart what the 2 words, social and presence, refer to in the context of computer-mediated communication. Now, we hear the term virtual learning environment more often than computer-mediated communication, but let's talk a little bit about the context then behind social presence. So, how many people here teach online? I don't know how to ask the Zoom audience, I can't see the responses, but I'm curious, if you teach online, put a yes in the chat. This is important for something later. If you do or have ever considered converting your face-to-face class to an online course, I'm sure somewhere in the suggested rubrics and tools to enhance your online course, you came across the term social presence. Social presence is a subjective experience an individual has in their learning environment. Catch up my speakeasy. The individual's experience is influenced by both the perceived physical and psychological distance between them and the other individual's presence in the same location. So social presence is not based on just the technological qualities of the medium. So take this environment, for example. There's a display with the lecture notes. There are chairs placed close together for avatars to sit in. The chairs have various animations the person could optionally apply to enhance their own visual aesthetic. There's a natural base landscape that hopefully provides a more relaxing environment for the discussion. Individuals also have the option of sitting wherever they want, which means they could choose to sit near people they like or know, or maybe even with the virtual distance, they prefer to sit slightly away from the crowd. These are all subjective decisions made by the individual. These are all virtual elements provided by available technology to enhance your subjective experience of this talk in a virtual learning environment. So, we're going to unpack the phrase social presence from an academic perspective within the context of a virtual learning environment. But before we get started, though, I'm curious how you all define social presence in this context of virtual worlds. So I'm going to put, if you can open a browser, I would like it if you popped over and used this Padlet. I was going to use a timer, so we take a few minutes to jot down how you define social presence. So grab a sticky note, write a sentence about what social presence means to you. And we'll just take, I put 5 minutes, but we'll just take a couple of minutes. At the top of this is one of the most cited definitions of social presence, which is the subjective experience of being present with a real person and having access to their thoughts and emotions, which comes from Bioka in 1997. And the blue sticky on this page is the definition of social presence I operationalized from my dissertation, which is that I use social presence within the context of Second Life as a sense of being there that makes the user's perceived availability an opportunity for social interaction. And I'll be quiet for just a minute. You guys can type however you can type. I don't know. Some people have used Padlets and some people haven't. So the growth and interest in what social presence meant in a mediated learning environment took off in the 1990s. So research explored how people identified their own social self virtually. But then, what is the social self? This definition was adapted from the Schultz and Brooks 2019 that said that the existence of each participant's social self is dependent on others validating its self-presentation. It is through the response for that the response that the first move, example, presentation of self, is confirmed as existing or having meaning. So in other words, one's involvement obligation in a joint activity with others ultimately entails responses that not only satisfy the task requirement of the activity, but also validates that the other's presentation of self. So we're going to work on an example of that later. So Stewart in 1992 explained being there virtually as the extent to which one feels present in the mediated environment rather than in the immediate physical environment. So let's go back to the 90s for just a minute. Sure, I was in high school when he wrote this. But while I was in high school, I was visiting Navy Pier in Chicago playing Mech Warrior games at the Battletech Center there. So I was experiencing a mediated environment in a Battletech simulator that displaced me from my own physical environment. And I would never have guessed that I would study this now back then. But the definition came out in 1992, which I think is fascinating. So being there became a term to represent how a user was transported from their physical body in an environment to another environment. So research about what presence in being there was important to virtually mediated environments. And in 1997, Slater and Wilbur's notion that a highly present individual should identify with the virtual body, avatar, portrayed in the virtual environment, and therefore could consider himself or herself as being located in the environment in which that body is portrayed, supports the role of social presence in virtual environments. There it is, right? Second Life. This idea of immersion in a virtual environment is connected to the medium's technological capacity to generate realistic experiences that can remove people from their physical reality. From the technological perspective, to help an individual experience a subjective feeling of social presence, this is mediated by the available hardware. like audio, visual quality, your monitors, frame rate, field of view, for example. The role of social presence in virtual reality in terms of like head-mounted displays is also another discussion for another day. So presence is needed for people to fully experience a virtual environment. And in the 90s, there were 3 leaders in this research, and they said that presence is a subjective for the individual and for them to experience actually being in the mediated virtual environment. So I hope you're following the discussion of just social presence, because now I have to share there are 2 other categories of presence in the research in the 90s and early 2000s. Telepresence, the extent to which one feels present in the mediated environment rather than in the immediate physical environment. Self-presence, the extent to which the virtual self is experienced as the actual self. And social presence, the sense of being with another and the ease with which one perceives to have the access to the intelligence, intentions, and sensory impressions of another. So in 2003, Bioka published an article called Definitions of Social Presence, and they summarize the classifications and definitions by researchers so far. So the rabbit hole I went down turned out to have so many branches. But how did social presence really get started? I would be remiss if I did not mention Short, Williams, and Christie. And so here it is. Short et al. Introduced their theoretical framework to understand the interactions happening between and among people using different forms of media. According to Short, the core components of social presence are intimacy and immediacy. So these 2 concepts are closely related to each other. Intimacy refers to the feeling of connectedness that communicators feel during an interaction. And while immediacy is the psychological distance between the communicators. And these were determined by verbal and nonverbal cues, such as facial expressions, vocal cues, and physical appearance. So at the time, the media they explored involved television, radio, telephones, face-to-face interaction. These were the technologies of the times. And the times have changed. So the view that social presence can be technologically determined was followed by the computer-mediated communication researchers like Walther and Parks. However, the concept that people feel different levels of social presence during their experiences in a specific medium plays an active role in designing the environment using technology. So the environment could be online, Canvas, Moodles, Blackboard, virtual worlds like OpenSim, Second Life. You could have the technology to access all those virtual learning environments, but people needed more to engage those learners inside the environment. So you could post readings in Canvas and discussion questions in a forum, but can you really tell if the people participating exhibit social presence with each other while writing an answer to the question? There's no avatar, there's no voice, there's no chat tool outside the forum. It's just the individual, the reading, and the question. So there's technology, but very little presence. So acknowledging people have experiences during virtual interactions helps designers build an experience with this goal in mind. Is your goal to build a natural-looking landscape to engage visitors with mindfulness and reflective journal writing? That is one of the purposes of my sim that you are all here visiting. The other is to show instructional design tools available in virtual worlds. But what I really want is for people to feel connected with the virtual world they are visiting and with the people they are there with. So, sorry, my slides got out of order. I apologize. So how can you measure that? There are quantitative and qualitative instruments available to measure social presence. Selecting an instrument is a personal decision, influenced by your data and opinion. During COVID, when I was spending a lot of time in Second Life, I found this model, the Interactional Process Model of Social Presence, developed by Schultz and Brooks in 2019. And I thought, this is it. This model to qualitatively explore the data, encode the data low, medium, or high based on this model. Of course, the best part for me was the model was developed using experiences that happened in Second Life. For the development of their model, Schultz and Brooks examined extensive interaction literature and applied that to 2 different scenarios that took place between people in Second Life. So let's use this event as an example. The avatars here teleported to this location, making them co-present with me. At this location, they can monitor each other's avatar behavior in chat. The avatars here are exhibiting a low degree of social presence. To determine if there is a medium degree of social presence, it's necessary to determine if the avatars here believe that each other exist in the same virtual space. That is, that the avatars here are cognitively and emotionally involved in the interaction that's happening, which is evidenced by responses to each other. So while we aren't dancing, snail racing, boating, or hiking, which would be one way to determine a medium degree, these kinds of interactions show that the avatar is involved in the interaction that is happening. So one way to see if a medium degree of social presence was happening here is if there were questions and side questions in the local chat going on. As the presenter, I exhibit a medium degree of social presence, as I am both cognitively and emotionally involved with all of you during this talk. If all of you are cognitively and emotionally involved in this talk, it would need to be demonstrated in some way, like local chat comments, or your avatar standing, sitting, or even leaving. She stood up. So, can we get to a high degree of social presence? To do that, we have to show in a virtual environment that we support the other's involvement in the same environment and validate their own social self here. If the interactions move, beyond the perception that myself and you are both here, and by being here, there is mutual support of each other, which is validated through our interactions, a high degree of social presence is evidenced. We can get there by communicating in the virtual environment. For example, questions and additional discussion are relayed in the local chat or in voice, or even passed to me through a note card, and this continues the discussion you and I are having, thus validating our existence right now. Combining the visual animations available in Second Life, like dancing, racing, eating, sitting, walking, with the voice and text communication shows that we support each other in our joint activity together, like being together at this talk. If we decided to take a walk through my sim and stop at the journaling locations and talk about each of those as a group, that would get us all to a high degree of social presence. So, I have one more Padlet. I'm going to wrap this up with one more Padlet. Now that I've talked a lot about social presence, we should think about what elements combine to make it work in a virtual learning environment. There is extensive research that predicts positive communication outcomes when social presence is actively addressed in computer-mediated communication. So what do you think? Do you feel social presence would help people be more present with each other in a virtual learning environment? So, I don't know, my Padlet might not work. Everyone was pretty I really like all these definitions. I'll have to move them around. But I'm curious, that was my other talking point though, is that what makes you feel present in this environment? That's the important thing. And how do you replicate that in your online classes, for example, so that you know that your students and you are present at the same time working on the same thing? Oh, I see a few more people jumped in the Padlet. So Apollina asks, yes, asking people to socialize in a forum and responding to them as a teacher is to me social presence. I found that learners engaged more. So that's the second model that I used in my dissertation. So, because I coded for knowledge construction, and that is the most common way to determine if social presence is in a forum, is to use the interaction analysis model, which the chair of my dissertation committee developed, Lani Gunwardina. So that's a good point, and that's cool that you say that, but it would make me, I would have to ask later, I'd be like, so why do you think that? Is it the level, what level of writing happens in the knowledge, in the discussion forum that shows a higher level of engagement with the material so that you could say that there was knowledge construction happening which would result in social presence? There's actually a lot of literature that talks about that. Okay. Discussion forums in online classes do force students to have an opinion because often there's a grade tied to your discussion forum. Although I don't teach online, I have coded a lot of discussion forum data in my lifetime. And there are definitely mechanisms and strategies to encouraging students to participate at a higher level in their discussion forums. Audio is super important. I absolutely agree. Actually, I think it's an underutilized tool in Second Life. Because although voice is convenient for a lot of things, having recorded audio that plays at certain things or events, not YouTube, but just here in Second Life would be useful. Right. Audio is more real than text. You can see that. But again, what we're talking about, though, are tools. Ah. It is. The presence piece, the presence piece is really your feeling and then trying to measure it. Oh, that's cool. How do you teach your students how to record their voice in a social forum? In Moodle? Oh, see, that's pretty neat. Right, I agree with you, Nellie. Thank you so much for coming, Barbara. If there was a more convenient way to record audio, I think in Second Life, I think people would use it. Well, now that's not entirely true. So you can record text in Second Life because you can save it to a folder on your desktop. And I saved a whole lot of text. And actually, VWEC saves text for discussions that they have. So you can just copy and paste also the entire local chat and use that. And that becomes data. But you guys are doing a great job of showing a high degree of social presence, which is what this discussion would be coded at. Yes, absolutely, which is why I wanted to use Padlets. I'm actually very fond of Padlet. I especially like the fact that you can take a snippet screenshot of something and then just copy that right into the Padlet. It's super convenient and can portray a point you're trying to make. I'm sorry. It usually works. Everyone got the first one going really well. The second one was not as effective, unfortunately. So I hate to say that this is a short talk for me because I have a house guest and I need to go. But I am happy to always talk about social presence in my research. And if you wander around my sim, there are activities. It's a work in progress, as they say. It's a labor of love, and I'm still developing some of them. But I'm working on a interactive activity for people to consider mindfulness in their life and how to use it, and then how reflective journaling is part of a mindful activity that can help you feel calmer and more relaxed. So, I appreciate that. I'm so glad you guys all came. I'm always excited to see people in Second Life. I will have references, and I will send them to Nellie, and then she can upload them.